immortal words, we are many, they are few. ICE is creating a huge panic among the Spanish-speaking Latino heritage population in this country. But there are 5,000 ICE agents in this country. There are 50 million people of Spanish descent in this country. So that's 10,000 to 1. If we look at a community the size of Newark, we're probably dealing with 5 agents covering all of Newark, maybe 6 or 7, depending how important they think it is. So this is a force that, if deprived of backup from the local police, which I think can be effectuated politically, is not big enough to really terrorize an organized community. It's big enough to terrorize a disorganized community, but not an organized community. The second thing that has to be understood about this situation is that ICE is powers in this country are delimited by the law that enabled them, and their police powers are limited to arresting people who they have reason to believe are in this country without proper documents. So, reason to believe does not include speaking Spanish, looking Hispanic, having the wrong skin color, or even speaking English with a Spanish accent. They have to have something that they can demonstrate is reasonable evidence. And one of the main political points of the Rapid Response Network is to develop a deterrent so that they will not be violating that restriction on their detention. So the idea is to deter detentions. We're actually we're getting underway because unfortunately there was confusion about the start time.
Oh yeah, I know, we were here.
All right. So that's basically the background. What I was just saying was the background is there are very few ICE agents in this country, and their powers are limited by the necessity that they have to have a reasonable ground for detention. So what we're going to do is start with the basic concept of what happens when a call comes in. When you as volunteers are going to be committed to having your phones on for certain 4-hour periods during the week. So when a call comes into your phone, basically there's certain steps that you have to take initially. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask for one of those back. So we sort of have certain categories for the calls. The main category that we're designed to deal with is an emergency confrontation with ICE agents. So the ICE agent is, confronting the person in a workplace, outside their home, or on the street in a car. That's the main category of calls that we're designed to take. Now, second category of call, and I'll go into each of these in turn, is a call that we will take, but is not on an emergency basis, which is a person is being harassed on account of their immigration status. Landlord says, I'm not going to clean up the rats. If you complain, I'll tell ICE. Or I'm illegally raising your rent if you complain. employer is not paying wages, employer is threatening people, that sort of thing. We want to handle that, but it's on a non-emergency basis. So that's category, the second category of calls. The call types that we're not going to handle, that we're going to refer to other people, and all of you will have a list of phone numbers, is routine immigration questions. Unfortunately, from past experience, that may be the majority of the calls that we receive, especially initially. People want help with their immigration status and so on. So we're going to refer these calls to local immigration hotlines where they have lawyers.
Elena was talking about.
And finally, there are calls that have nothing to do with immigration. People see a hotline, they're going to say, you know, I have trouble paying my rent, you know, one needs some food supplies and so on. And then we have a list of local social service numbers, which we will update, and we'll refer people to them. Yeah.
Is there I see it's the New York Immigration Hotline. Is there a New Jersey immigration hotline as well, or we're referring them to the New York one?
We're referring them to New York, because the New York hotline is specifically designed as one line for New York City and one line for the rest of the country. So they're a very well-equipped hotline. They actually can communicate in dozens of languages. So, and they have lawyers. All right. So let's go then to the next step, which is to discuss the first type of call. So the first type of call is the one that we really want people to get, is the confrontation. So we basically want to get certain information from the caller right away. What's your name? Where are you? Your exact address. That's going to be particularly important once we get to the second stage, where we can send witnesses. Who wants to speak with you? Is it ICE? Is it the police? Where is this person? In other words, are they outside your... Come on.
Hi guys. I'm
Oh, hey, how you doing?
Hi. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just came
For the fly.
to drop posters
Okay.
to put in the
Oh,
restaurants.
sure.
So,
This is Alejandro,
Yes,
the May 1st, actually, we're doing the
great.
training, yeah.
Very nice meeting you.
Okay,
Nice meeting
So I'm sorry that I cannot stay with you. I'm gonna keep
That's
going.
okay.
All right, so I'm gonna just
Just drop it on the table.
Drop
yeah.
it. All right.
Okay, great, thanks.
So, it's very important we learn where the ICE agent is. Is the ICE agent already inside the house? Are they outside pounding on the door? Are they both on the street? So that you get an idea of the geometry of the situation. So, what we want to convey as quickly as possible is to convey to them their basic rights, which will, if carried out correctly, defend them in most cases against detention. So you want to say, I want to tell you your rights. Now, it's also important that we say this because we don't want to imply that we're lawyers giving them legal advice. It's not legal in this country for people who aren't lawyers to give legal advice that they describe as legal advice. But if you explain that you're telling somebody your rights, that's perfectly all right. That's within our First Amendment rights to tell people what their rights are, obviously. So, if this is a situation in which ICE is outside, it's the most favorable situation, we want to convey immediately, you have the right not to open the door. That immediately protects them. Now, it's not to say that ICE never breaks down doors. ICE has been known to break down doors.
Right.
That is illegal. They will be violating somebody's rights. And with the right response network, we can hopefully make them pay a very heavy political price if they do that. We want to convey that the only way they should get through that door is if they slip under the door a warrant that's signed by a judge. Now, the words signed by a judge are very important because these guys carry in their pocket what you could call fake warrants. We have fake news today, we also have had for years fake warrants. And we have fake judges. There are fake judges, which are called administrative judges. These people, even though they have the word judge in their name, they cannot sign their name as Judge so-and-so because they are basically employees of the Immigration Service. So even if they have a warrant that would be titled administrative warrant, that is not a warrant that can legally get them through a door. Only a search warrant or an arrest warrant signed by a judge. Now, in many cases, the call will come after this point. Now, we hope that it will come before this point. But if it comes after this point, where ICE has already been allowed access, the most important thing is you have a right not to speak with them. That's the most important thing that of all that we can convey. If you look at all of these reports of detentions, there are only basically two categories of detentions going on. One, which I'll get to in a second, is where they know the name of the person they want to detain. In other words, for example, they have a deportation order against so-and-so, so they know who they're after, and they can detain them without further ado. In most cases, the detention occurs opportunistically, in which they go to a place where they either suspect or know that there's a person they want to pick up living there, and then they start picking up everybody else by asking questions. And almost any answer that people give can give them that reason to suspect. So one of the most common is, show me your papers, show me your documentation. And the correct response to that is, I don't want to talk with you. I'm not going to answer your questions. Or if you want to be if you feel that that's too rude, you can say, I will not answer you without my lawyer present. Whether people have lawyers or not. It's just really a polite way of saying, I'm not going to talk to you. Now, one of the things that we're going to be doing, and which other groups have done, is give out cards that convey this information. So that, first of all, if people can't say this in English, they can simply whip out this card, which says, in polite legalistic terms, I'm not going to say anything to you. If they do not have this person's name on the list of people they know that they're going to detain, then that is pretty much an absolute block. Because if you don't open your mouth, they don't have a reason to suspect you're here without documentation. They can't, just look at you. And so that is the way so many people get detained. They panic, they pull out, an Ecuadorian passport, they say, I don't have any documents, or, in one case, that was in the news, they actually said, I have a work permit, because they were here under DACA. And the guy says, that doesn't matter, you weren't born here. So, you know, anything that's said can be reasonable. But if nothing is said, that cannot be reasonable. Now, there are reasons that involve silence, but they involve action. Like, if a person runs away,
Right.
that can be considered reason to believe that they're avoiding ICE and therefore illegally in this country, right? So, but if you do nothing, if you say nothing, they can't detain you if they don't already have. So, now, we want to, as much as possible, emphasize that we do not want them to in any way convey to us what their situation is. Because we have to assume that ICE is probably within earshot. So obviously if somebody says, I'm not, just cut them off as soon as possible, say, don't say anything about immigration, your status, even to us. Because telling us, in most of these situations, is only telling the enemy. So, now, in all of these rules, unfortunately, there are exceptions. For the most part, it's going to be fairly innocuous what those exceptions are. If a person does actually have a permanent residency card, by law they are obliged to show that card when it is demanded. Of course, the card in itself does give them protection against detention. So, but if somebody asks you, do you have a green card, and you don't have a green card, you are in no way obligated to share the information that you don't have a green card. You can simply, again, say, I don't want to speak to you. Only if you possess a green card are you then obligated to say, yes, here it is.
Well, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is that reasonable cause then, if they ask that question point blank and they say,
No.
I'm not responding? Is
No,
that-
because everybody, the point is that everybody in this country who does not possess a green card has the right to respond, I don't want to talk to you.
Right,
In other words, we have a situation under the Obama administration, which may well be continuing as a tactic, but they had a favorite tactic under the last administration, which was sort of like a rerun of some of the World War II movies we've all seen, in which they got onto trains. And when the train was moving, this is in like upstate New York, near the border, they would get onto each car and say, papers, please, just like the Gestapo in the movies. Well, in the United States, it's perfectly legal to get up and say, papers, please. But it's also legal to say, you know, I'm not talking to you. It's perfectly legal. In the United States, we're not obligated to carry identification papers, and it's perfectly legal to refuse to discuss your possession or non-possession of ID papers with any agent of ICE or even of the police. So a citizen, the correct response of a citizen in this situation is, I don't want to talk to you, this isn't Nazi Germany.
But it says if you have the green card, you have to show it.
That's right.
Does that go for American citizens, United States citizens as well?
No,
Only if you're a green card holder?
only permanent residents have to show identification.
Okay.
That's the only exception. Whether that's a constitutional exception or not,
But the
I
fact
haven't
they're
seen the
denying-
case law. But US citizens do not have to identify. In some states, if you are asked your name by an officer of the police, you must give it. In some states, you don't have to even give your name. The other thing to understand, it's very important, is that ICE agents do not have police powers over people who are legitimately in this country. So for example, an ICE agent cannot arrest a citizen. Only the police can arrest citizens.
Or a green card holder.
Or a green card holder, right. So,
So all they have to do is pretend like there's a possibility that they could be a citizen or a green card holder by not, that they're a citizen by not saying anything.
that's right.
And then ICE can't arrest them.
That's
The police
right.
could.
So again, if you say, I don't want to talk to you, that is not evidence that you're here illegitimately. Because I or any of us who were born in this country can also legally say, I don't want to talk to you. By the way, in most circumstances, that's perfectly legal with regards to the police themselves. Although many police are not aware of it. I actually was interrogated by a cop in my own neighborhood. And he wasn't aware of the fact that I didn't have to show him any ID. We got into a long-running confrontation that was finally resolved when the sergeant arrived.
So how, sorry, I have a
Yeah.
question. How are they sure that they're showing up at the right place? If they can't ask for ID without a warrant signed by a judge, how do they know that that's the person that they're looking for?
Well, they don't. I mean, first of all, as I say, they have two targets. One are people who have deportation orders already against them. So then, in many cases, they have the address from their own records. Or, obviously, there are situations that are even worse that are much more difficult for us to defend against, where people are going to ICE offices deliberately to check in, and then they're detained. So there's been quite a bit of that in the press. But in a typical situation, they're going to a place where they have reason to believe that somebody who is on their list. And then they opportunistically pick up the brother, the sister, the father, and whoever else gives them information that they can use. Now, the other thing that is extremely important to convey is that they do not have the right to search an apartment or a house without your permission. That you can loudly say, I do not give you permission to search these premises.
So they can't get a search warrant like police can. ICE can't get it.
They can, but in the vast majority of cases,
They don't have to.
they don't. First of all, having to do so would enormously slow up their work, and they are a very small group of people. And second of all, in many cases, they couldn't, because to obtain a search warrant, you actually have to prove to the judge that you have real cause for the search warrant.
But if you're saying they
And
don't,
that's important, because even if you don't show people, you know, the Ecuadorian passport, if they start searching and they find the Ecuadorian passport, they flip it open, there's your picture, then that's reasonable. That is, I mean, it's a fairly low threshold, but that threshold would then be crossed, and they would then say, all right, we can detain you.
but that would only be relevant if you've let them in the house. So they're
Right.
sitting at the kitchen table and they begin going through.
Well, they won't, I mean,
Or they're gonna ask.
generally the scenario, and we'll get into scenarios shortly because I know people have been waiting here. Generally, the scenario is they'll start searching as soon as they enter. And that's why you have to more or less loudly prevent them from doing that. Now,
In this state, do you have to give your name if they ask? So if they have your name on the list, how do they confirm it's you? Are you required here to give your name when they ask you?
I believe not, but I will check that with the ACLU.
Yeah, because if you don't tell them your name, how do they know
Right.
you're the right person?
I mean, if you're not required to give them any documentation, you shouldn't be required to give them your name, but again, law
That,
can be
as I
quite
say,
specific,
that,
so.
yeah. I believe that you are not, yeah. Now, obviously, again, there are exceptional situations that greatly increase the chance of detention. If a person calls us who is driving a car, then because driving a car is not a right in this country, it's a privilege that's conveyed by a driver's license. The problem is, at that point, a detention becomes much more difficult to avoid. It is possible, and again, even though you would have to, a person would have to respond if they are driving without a license, but they do not have a license, it still would be advisable if we were talking to a person in that situation to say, don't say anything else other than, you know, I do not have a license. Now they still become very vulnerable to arrest and detention, but they become much more vulnerable if they say more.
How do you navigate that on the phone if you don't want to tell them to not say anything else though, if maybe they do have a license, right?
Well, basically, as I say, what we're telling them, what we want to know right off the bat is, where are you? Where is this person? So if they just say an address and want to follow up, are you at home? Are you on the street? Are you in the car? Because obviously those are different situations. The best situation is if they're in their home, ICE is outside, which provides for potentially a prolonged confrontation. Just before we go into a little role playing, I want to go briefly into the next level, which is when we set up this system, as I think they explained, it's going to be strictly a hotline. However, we want to move as quickly as possible to the second layer, in which we have teams of people who are citizens or permanent residents who are available to go out on short notice, drive 15 or 20 minutes, and actually arrive at where an ongoing confrontation is taking place, which would normally be ICE outside and the person inside, and act as witnesses. Once we have this set up, once you've conveyed the essential first information, that conveying to that person their rights and what they should not do is the most important. Then you can say, you know, would you like witnesses to be present to record what's going on and to witness what's going on? And if they agree, then say, you know, I'll call you right back, and you would call a second computerized hotline, which would be only known to us, because we'll be the only ones using it. And that would redirect to a member of a witness team who would be on duty at the time. That witness would then call their partner, because we want to make sure at least two people go out simultaneously. And then you could get back on the phone while the witness team is coming. So we'll discuss later what the witness team will do, but that's just from the phone call end. So before we do a little role-playing, questions on this part.
So you've said that ICE doesn't have like arresting powers.
ICE has arrest powers only for individuals that they have reason to believe are in this country without the proper documentation. So if they don't have that reason, then they can't arrest anyone. And they do not have normal police powers so that they can't say to you or I, stand back or I'll arrest you. Now, when I get into the witnesses, we should go over what we can say to actual police if the police show up, because we actually have a right to do what we're doing. And the Supreme Court 30 years ago said that citizens do have the right to witness and peacefully comment on the actions of police powers. But we'll get into that next.
Well, what about Homeland Security? How?
ICE is part of Homeland.
It is.
Yeah. So what happened is after 9/11, Department of Homeland Security was organized, and various other agencies were split up and reorganized. And part of the reorganization was that the old INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service, was split up into the good guys and the bad guys, more or less, into ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is an enforcement arm, and then what's the other arm?
Custom and Border Patrol?
No, I think it's CIS, Citizenship and Immigration Service or something. Anyway, there's another part of the service that is actually involved in the process of becoming a permanent resident or a citizen, which is not involved in enforcement. So that's how we got the initials ICE, which is a subcategory under Department of Homeland Security.
So they're not allowed to just preemptively, without suspicion or reason to suspect, ask you for your ID?
They can ask you anything. The point is that you don't have the obligation to show them that ID, except if you were in the category of permanent resident. Then you have the obligation to show them, to carry with you at all times and to show them the proof of permanent residency. But a citizen does not have to show ID. And, other people are not obligated to show ID. And obviously, the big exception to this is if you're driving a car. Because if you're driving a car, you are under the obligation to prove that you have a license to drive. And driver's license is a form of identification.
But they aren't the enforcers of that law, right?
The question is, that's sort of up in the air. They have denied, at the moment ICE has denied setting up places in the interior of the country where they can stop cars randomly. Now, I believe the situation is at the border, they have got that power near the border.
That's what I was wondering, if they have to stop you with cause if you're driving. I mean, there has to be, can you ask them?
No, I think that it's some of these
They can just
things,
stop
they
them?
have checkpoints for random stops. Obviously, if a person without proper documentation and without a driver license is driving a car, they are putting themselves at a higher level of risk. Some people have no choice, they must do that. But clearly, that is the highest level of risk in which you won't necessarily be able to avoid detention even by remaining silent. Because they will know that you're driving a car without a license.
Do ICE and the police work together when they do these like kind of home raids?
This is a really critical political point. In other words, the municipalities have the right to decide for themselves on the deployment of their police forces. Many communities, whether they call themselves sanctuary cities or they call themselves something else, are refusing ICE any cooperation. In a community like Newark, we can be reasonably confident that that is currently the condition. And again, when this is violated, there would be an extremely heavy political price to pay. You can imagine that you have police, Baraka is the head, it does command the police force here. You can imagine the backlash if his police force was assisting ICE. So, okay, well look, I'll take one more question and then we should do the run through. All right.
Oh, I did have a question, it might not be so related, but I know that don't some people who are undocumented get driver's licenses in like other states and they don't have to show documentation? Or they get their car somehow registered in another, aren't there some states that let you get a driver's license even though you're not?
Oh yeah,
So then, if you take that out of your.
that's right.
Okay.
But